everybody. I'm Logan from 8bitfoundation.com, and I'm here with...
Adam, also from 8-Bit Foundation.
We're here to talk about Bioshock Infinite.
Just basically everything about Bioshock Infinite.
The ending, the characters, the craziness, all the stuff.
Exactly.
So, first off, if you finish the game, basically the ending, that's what you're going to be thinking about. What was the ending? What was happening? What's going on with Booker? What's going on with Elizabeth? What is this multiple worlds theory? Everything, why is it called Bioshock Infinite?
So basically, what the ending breaks down to is, especially right after the final battle, you find out that Elizabeth is now omnipotent, and basically there are infinite worlds, and each one is a branch off of different events that occurs in those worlds. So all the lighthouses that you see are a different world in this ending. And basically there are constants and variables within those worlds that are always the same. So there's always a protagonist, and he's probably always male. And there's always someone who is helping him, protecting him. And there's always something he's trying to rescue. And there's always a tyrant, I guess, that he's going after. And in this case, Booker is the main character. And in the original Bioshock, it was Jack, you said?
Yeah, Jack. According to Elizabeth, she said there's always a man, there's always a city.
Yeah.
And we can assume, it's not stated directly, but we can assume that Rapture is possibly another form of Columbia in another world. It could potentially be that way. It's hinted very subtly that maybe Booker is also Jack. Maybe Andrew Ryan could be Comstock, because in the original Bioshock, I don't know if you caught this, but Jack was essentially Andrew Ryan.
Yeah.
Because it was his son. I mean, albeit he was chemically altered
Yeah,
and things
exactly.
like that. But essentially the two characters, the villain and the protagonist in both games, are each other. So that's something that they did carry over between the two games, as well as the crazy dystopian locations.
Yeah, I think it's interesting that in the first Bioshock, you had the little sisters who were the people you were saving, or you believe that you're saving them the whole time. And in Infinite, you have Elizabeth, who originally you're saving, but then it turns out in both cases that the person you are saving, who you think you are saving, the damsel, ends up being the person that saves you. And in the case of Infinite, Elizabeth becomes all-powerful, and she shows you, like, all these other worlds, what the reality behind Infinite is, or Columbia. And in the original game, you have the little sisters who end up being the people who save you at the end, actually, and also give you all the powers that you get throughout the game. And it's kind of the same between the two.
Mm-hmm. I think we should take time to talk about the ending, just that very last part where Booker's getting baptized, or he chooses to get baptized, or he doesn't. There are two different events there that happen that are basically two separate paths leading from one event. And what happens is Booker, if he remains Booker DeWitt, he chooses not to get baptized. This is after the Battle of Wounded Knee. He tries to change himself, try and get some forgiveness, change things.
Finding religion.
Exactly. And he, in one timeline, in one world, he rejects the baptism. He continues on. He remains Booker DeWitt. He has a daughter, Anna, who we'll talk about later, and the events of Bioshock Infinite happen. In the separate timeline, he is baptized. He renames himself Zachary Hale Comstock. Then he becomes the, leader of Columbia, like we all came to know in the game. And do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I was just going to say that basically he finds religion, and he becomes this kind of tyrant that he was kind of rallying against, that kind of thing. And I think, although I'm not 100% sure, I think that the Booker timeline where he becomes Booker instead of Comstock is separate from, I think the timeline that the game takes place in is actually Comstock's timeline. And
it is.
Yeah.
It is,
right?
It is Comstock's
timeline. And the Luteces
timeline.
go back and they bring Booker into this new time.
Right. In the beginning of the game, you begin on the boat with the Luteces, who you
don't know they're the Luteces.
Yeah, you don't know who they are when the game begins, but it turns out they're the Luteces. Booker is only aware of one thing, and that's someone telling him to bring them a girl, and his debt will be wiped away. That's because the Luteces retrieved Booker from his timeline, brought him into Comstock's timeline to try and make things right, get his daughter back, stop Comstock, all these things. The travel between those worlds wiped his memory, which goes back to the original quote in the beginning of the game that says, I think something along the lines like the mind will desperately try to
Yeah,
create memories where none exist, something like that. So you begin basically as a clean slate. The player as well as Booker believes, okay, I owe money, so I'm gonna go and get this girl and repay my
You essentially
debt.
think you're kind of like on the ropes and you're a bounty hunter and you're trying to like it seems like he's done this before. I got that explicitly felt like when I first started playing that I was a bounty hunter and not this like war veteran who essentially just lost all his memory. But
Right.
yeah.
And when you go through the game and things like that, and you realize that the Lutesses have brought back not a couple hundred, but around 120.
Yeah,
Bookers
there's like
from
123rd is the one that you play through.
Exactly. You from separate worlds that are similar to your timeline, they've retrieved 122. You're the 123rd Booker DeWitt, and they've all failed except for you, the player. And that all relates back to something that has to deal with quantum mechanics, where the multiple worlds theory, where there's something called Schrodinger's cat, where if you do not observe a cat that is alive or dead, it is both alive and dead until you observe it. And the only reason that Booker succeeds is because he's being observed by the player, which is something completely deep and unreal and
something that I don't think everyone would get just playing through it one time.
Just mind melting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think I think Irrational does a good job of showing you a lot of the explanations that they're going for, but I feel like in some cases it's a little bit more buried than it should be, especially in the case of the Lutesses being the same person. And I know that when I went through it, I kind of felt that I felt like I didn't get the voxophones that were like explicit about it, but I kind of felt they were the same person, but I didn't really know until I went back and played through it a second time.
Right, and if you're wondering who the Lutesses are, they are actually the same person. It is one person. They are from different worlds from each other. They're basically one's man, one's a male, one's a female, and
Rosalind and Robert.
Right, they located each other and realized that the only difference between the two in these two distinct worlds was their gender. So they decided to team up, and there were things going on, and they were essentially murdered by Jeremiah Fink in their machine of their making that allowed them to travel between worlds, and that's why they're able to exist across.
Yeah, it dislodged them from their own timeline, from both of their timelines. So they're basically just time travelers, or not time travelers, interdimensional travelers.
Right, they can travel through time and space basically freely.
Yeah. Yeah. So what did you think about the Lutece characters? Did you find them interesting? Because I know a lot of people say that it's their favorite characters. So.
I thought they were interesting. As like the first time I played the game, I had no idea what was going on, but it was very interesting. Every time they appeared, I was intrigued as to why they were there, what they were saying, because almost everything they said was a riddle. It was almost like,
or just indecipherable.
Right, they made almost no sense the first time you met them, and then once you finish the game and realize what's going on, you can go back and just appreciate how well they were written and everything that happened. It was pretty impressive. I really liked the
it's like how the would you kindly thing from the first game. You go through one time and you don't notice it, and then the second time you play, you realize that all these events that you're doing you're basically being forced to do them by this code word that's encoded in your brain. And it's kind of the same with Infinite. You go through a second time and you realize all these little things you missed and all these things that were influencing what you did, the plot.
Right.
So, yeah, it was pretty interesting.
What I thought was interesting was the fact that Comstock and Booker were essentially the same person, but the whole time during the game, there was almost no indication that they were the same person.
Yeah.
I didn't even cross my mind that they were the same person.
I had no idea.
Not one time.
Yeah, and I was telling Logan about this the other day, that when I played through the game the first time, my roommate came into the room right at the end when he tells a line about him being Comstock, so I didn't know, and I had to go back and watch the ending on YouTube to figure it out. So
right. During the final scene in the baptism where the Elizabeths from all the different worlds appear, they make the revelation that if he does take the baptism, he changes his name to Comstock. He becomes a completely different man. Or if he walks away, he remains Booker DeWitt.
Yeah.
So the entire game revolves around that single event where you walk up to the pastor and he baptizes you, just like in the intro to the game.
Yeah.
When you walk down into Columbia.
That's one of those moments where like you go back a second time and it's like mind blowing.
Yeah.
For me, it was like you realize that the guy that baptized Booker and either made him Comstock or Booker is the same guy who baptizes you going into Columbia, and he's blind, so that's why he doesn't recognize Booker. He would have recognized Booker if he wasn't blind.
It was that was the first thing I noticed when I first played the game. When you walk down the hallway that's got the water and the candles and everything, and then I was like, okay, this guy's blind. And then it turns out...
You realized he was blind? Because when I saw it, I was just like, he has really nice eyes. Those nice, gray, piercing eyes.
I totally could tell he was blind, but it was something I noticed right away, and then I noticed I could tell who the voice was when they brought him back through the lighthouse, and I was like, okay. And then it hit me later that, wow, it's the same guy. Yeah. So clearly in Comstock's timeline, he appreciates this man for essentially changing his life,
saved his life,
erasing his past, basically, and brings him to Columbia, where he basically begins a new religion, essentially.
Yeah, kind of a founder worship kind of religion, which is interesting.
What I'm interested to ask is, did you think that I guess you could call it, well, not guess, but the racism and things like that, the portrayals and everything, do you think it was pertinent to the world? Do you think it was, I guess you could call it tasteful? Was it necessary? What do you think about everything?
I definitely think it's tasteful. I don't think they do anything kind of out there that makes you think that it was kind of on the nose or anything like that. It does a good job of world building. I don't think it really plays into the plot that much. It makes Columbia really interesting to explore, but it's interesting because Bioshock Infinite's a really American game when you think about it. Like, I'm curious what people from Europe and other parts of the world think about Bioshock Infinite looking, because it's very, like, introspective. When I was playing, I was like, it's all the parts of American history that people try to cover up usually.
Yeah, it's essentially the culmination of the dark past of the United States rising from the ground and becoming an entire city.
Yeah, it's weird because a lot of the portrayals of black people and other races in the game are not far off from actual portrayals in real life of what they did. So it's really interesting to see that. But yeah, it doesn't really play into the story, but it does a good job of world building.
What did you think about the religious aspect of the game?
Again, it's a lot of world building, but it does a good job of like setting up. Everyone understands like religious tyranny, so it's interesting because it sets up Comstock really well and makes him seem like this villain. Because a lot of people that play the game, I'm sure, are going to be religious. I saw leading up that Ken Levine got a lot of questions about, like, as a Christian, am I going to hate this game, that kind of thing. And I think definitely not. In fact, I think you'll like it even more because it's kind of lambasting the people that everyone rallies against, as these like religious extremists. So
right, I was surprised by, I wasn't following the game very closely because I didn't want anything to get spoiled in the last year, but seeing that first descent into the city when you're still in the rocket,
when you're floating down.
and you see the scripture floating down and the quotes, and you see the stained glass window and the song in the background, and you're essentially in a church. It was really surprising to me. I didn't know it was coming. No, me neither. And it was moving. I really didn't expect that, and it was total surprise.
Yeah, it makes you feel made me feel really uncomfortable. Like really like the same way when you first get into Rapture in the first game. It's like you don't really know what's going on. Everything's really dark, and you kind of like lost.
Right.
And it's weird because it's like that dichotomy of black and white. Like in the first game, you're afraid of the darkness at the beginning, like what's hiding it's the splicers, and then in the second game everything's really bright and everything's out there, so what is hiding? It is interesting.
It's almost, it being right in your face is almost as frightening as
just
it hiding. I mean, you've got giant murals of a man who's no less than you essentially, and they've got him idolized as a prophet, and they've got him in giant stained glass windows and statues, and they've got his quotes all over the entire city, essentially.
Yeah, and the things you look into.
The kinetoscopes.
Yeah, kinetoscopes, that's what it was. Yeah, those are pretty cool.
One of my favorite moments was rescuing Elizabeth and just kind of seeing the behind the scenes of like what's been going on with her. Before you ever get to see her or rescue her, you go through.
It's disturbing.
It's really disturbing. That's when it hit me like, okay, this place is not what it seems. I mean, essentially, it is Bioshock, so the place is definitely not what it seems. But that's when it hit me and said, "Wow, this isn't Rapture, but this place is not. This isn't a good place. Yeah, this place is bad." And you see things like video surveillance of her, unbeknownst to her. Actually, the first time you see her is through a two-way mirror. and
Yeah.
she doesn't even know that she's been
It's her
recorded.
changing room too. I
Yeah,
think,
it's
which is really
very
weird.
very disturbing. So
Well, the first time you even like get a glimpse of like anything about her life is you see like three things from her development, and one of them is the teddy bear. The second's her diary, her poetry book, and the third is her menstrual pad from her first time she had her period.
very disturbing.
Yeah.
They've got there was a way that they portrayed the scientists that were researching her as if there was some sort of monster creation, and you're going through and hearing these
Yeah,
voxophones
definitely.
about there's a black man who's cleaning up after these scientists, and they don't hold their tongue around them, so he gets to hear all the gossip and everything, and he keeps saying they're afraid of what's upstairs, and then you walk in and see a chalkboard of like age 6 months, age 7, age 17. You realize it's a girl, and you're
He makes a comment in that voxophone about like they got the cat by the tail, but they don't know whether they want to let go and run or pull it in, that kind of thing. So
it was really interesting to just see how they were afraid of Elizabeth and her powers, and how they were really just trying their hardest to keep her under control until Comstock was passed on or indoctrinated her enough for her to take his role.
And it's weird because they set Elizabeth up through that whole sequence of being like this. You think she's like kind of a weapon. I felt like she's like there's something about her that she doesn't realize yet, which is obvious as you play through. And she never fights in combat. She just hides the whole time.
Yeah.
So that was really interesting because then at the end, she becomes a god essentially. So.
Right, and that's why you see the whole thing in all over the game. It's something along the lines of the seed of the prophet shall sit the throne and drown in flames the mountains of man.
Yeah,
something like that. And she realizes through the course of the game that she is the next in line. She's the heir apparent to Comstock's kingdom, which is Columbia. And it turns out in a pretty amazing fashion that Columbia is just one giant roving airship.
Yeah, and I mean that's like has to do with the alternate dimensions. Booker like after the scene where the songbird throws him into that thing and he walks up into Comstock House and it's all of a sudden 6 months later. It's interesting because he's unlatched from time at that point because they've jumped so many times that he's kind of just falling through all these memories, or they kind of are memories, I guess, falling through them, and you realize that in one of the realities she grows up 6 months later and. No, it's later. You skip again once you get inside, and she's like really old, and she's burning New York to the ground. So.
Right. Very, very surprising moment.
Yeah, it was really surprising. I mean, you kind of know it's coming because of the beginning. You know something's going to happen with that.
Right.
You just don't remember it because it's like 11 hours later. So.
What did you think about Comstock and Elizabeth and their relationship as in, from her as a child, basically, and Songbird and being put in the monument and her being advertised as the lamb and being,
She doesn't even know. That's the thing. She doesn't know any of that. So when she gets out, it's really shocking. That She doesn't know she's Comstock's kid. Doesn't know she's Booker's kid.
Exactly.
So yeah, that was weird.
Yeah, the dynamic between Booker and Elizabeth, I appreciated that they kept it at a certain level. I had a friend ask me like, so is Booker in love with Elizabeth yet? And I was like, no, he's not. Like no. Not even hinted. There's no romance. It's not warranted at all. They just keep it at a certain level where they basically, they're not getting along the whole time. Far from it.
They need each other. They realize. Let's get into this story. They realize that they need each other and that kind of thing. But
right, and then it turned, in a turn of events, it turns out that Elizabeth is actually, her name's Anna, and as a baby she was sold to the Robert Lee Test. Yeah, essentially sold to Comstock for the purpose of.
Destroying the mountains of man.
Absolutely.
The Sodom below.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's weird. That was weird. That's one of those things where they explained it really well, but I think you kind of got to go through it more than once to understand that ending. Yeah. I feel like a lot of people rewatched the ending, like went back to their save point before and rewatched it because there's a lot going on in that last 30 minutes. Yeah. It's pretty dense.
How surprised were you when you ended up in Rapture?
I was just really excited. Yeah, it was really surprising. I didn't know that was going to happen. Yeah, it was really interesting.
I was blown away. I actually yelled.
Did you?
Yeah, I yelled what in I was just blown away. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah. The thing is, I think it's awesome because I think the ending would have been strong enough without it. It's fan service basically.
It is fan service. It was interesting. It ties in. They essentially could have gone anywhere. I mean, but they tied it in the beginning of the game. If you didn't notice, there was a moment where Songbird knocks you off of the skyline right after Monument Island, and you fall into the water, and he gets pinned under a piece of debris, and the water pressure cracks his islands.
Yeah, his islands.
And that's where it turns into he's got an issue with water pressure and things like that. That's his weakness, and that's why she takes you to Rapture.
So did you like the ending with Songbird, how he goes out?
I did.
He,
I think he or she. I don't. That's interesting.
It's a robot.
Yeah, it is. It's somebody. But I did. I think it was. I mean, the initial shock, like, oh my god, I'm in Rapture. Just that, and it had to be that first area. That first area where you get Electro Bolt and you zap the switch and go through the first door. That was perfect. I think he went out in an epic fashion.
Yeah, it was interesting because I don't think they really did much with Songbird. I know we agree on this. I don't think Songbird was really a big part at all of the game.
From where they advertised the game and where it was going and things like that, because in all honesty, Bioshock was essentially about they're on the cover of the original Bioshock. It's the Big Daddies and the Little Sisters. Yeah. Just they're essential to the plot. And the way they advertised and, shown the way they showed Bioshock Infinite initially was a lot about Elizabeth and the Songbird.
Yeah, I wonder if they kind of backed away from that because of how many comparisons people were making to the Big Daddies and Elizabeth.
It could be. It could be. Because there was almost no storyline behind Comstock.
Yeah.
For quite some time. He was actually not even advertised as a prophet.
Yeah, exactly. You don't know.
For a while. Yeah. So they definitely made some changes. It'd be interesting to maybe hear from Ken Levine or somebody at Irrational as to why they made him a religious prophet and made all these, Christian references. Or religious references.
Yeah, it's interesting. There seems like there's a lot of elements in the game that they kind of built early on, and they're like, we advertise this, so it's got to be like handymen. They're not in there that much. You only have like maybe 4 encounters, and they're nothing special. It's not a Big Daddy fight, really. Right. And then you have the Boys of Silence, the guys with the things.
Right.
Which I heard this. I don't know if this is true, but I heard that early on they were supposed to absorb any sound that your character was making, and then shoot it back at you all at once in like a file, like you just like all the audio at the same time.
Okay,
that's like one big.
That's pretty wild.
But they couldn't do it, so.
Then they turned them into human spotlights.
Yeah, which is
human cameras.
It's like the most boring section of the game, but
it was
the most unsettling. But it's like.
It was tense to play that and try and be stealthy. It was interesting.
Yeah, I think that's where a lot of the combat kind of falls apart. It felt really tacked on in that section. Like, why do I have to like avoid these guys and then shoot a bunch of Ben Franklins? It was just
right. That's in terms of that, I felt like the game sort of lost its footing in the middle.
Yeah, definitely.
It's sort of slowed down, and I wasn't as engaged as I was in the beginning because the world just pulls you in immediately. Yeah. And you've got Comstock, and you finally get Elizabeth, and then Songbird attacks, and you're kind of spending that first, quiet moments with Elizabeth and things like that. And then you step through the tear to try and get ammunition and weapons for the Vox Populi, and then it kind of just falls off.
Yeah. I know we touched on this in the Google Hangout, but what do you think about the Vox Populi?
I think, in a narrative sense, I think it works. I think it works that there are people that run Columbia. They've got this idea of white supremacy and things like that. And then they bring minorities on to essentially run the place, like fix it, clean it, things like that. It works. Those people obviously aren't living as well as the other people. They're not getting paid as much, and they're stuck there's no room for growth. So they're going to be entirely unhappy, and they're being forced to listen to almost ridiculous propaganda from a guy like Comstock.
Yeah, I keep hearing this quote from people talking about the game that supposedly Ken Levine says it all the time, is that no matter what your society's like, someone's got to like wash all the toilets and clean up all the shit, essentially. So
no, I completely agree.
You definitely get that sense with the Vox Populi.
Right. There's something to be said about the Civil War between the founders and the Vox Populi, and just essentially it's just civil rights.
Yeah. So I'm curious, what was your favorite part of the game? Like, what was your favorite defining moment of Bioshock Infinite?
The moment that defined Bioshock Infinite for me was the intro. And it wasn't so much the lighthouse or anything like that, because it was sort of vague. It was interesting playing the bells. But that first takeoff into Columbia was essentially magical. I I mean, it hit me harder than it did when I first saw Rapture. It was more powerful and just it was amazing. I'll remember that. If anything, if I forget everything about Bioshock Infinite,
you'll remember that moment.
Yes, when I'm 85 in a hospital bed, I'll remember.
That's funny because what I always remember about the first Bioshock is when you're going into Rapture and you go into the signs. It's like all good things of the earth flow into the city, but then the light flickers on the last one at like the hit of the note. I always remember that part. Yeah, it's like my favorite.
And what was your favorite part?
I know I've always been telling you that my favorite part was a coin flip, but now that I think about it, my favorite part is when you're in the Emporia and you walk into that building and there's a tear and you hear, what's it called? Girls Just Want to Have Fun. And then you listen to the voxophone and he's like, essentially, this guy keeps getting tears in his house and he's hearing songs from the future and he's stealing them whole hog and just like making money off of them in Colombia. So.
Yeah, those happened in the music shop, right? So he was stealing those songs. Okay, that's awesome.
Yeah, I love that part. Now I think about it.
All right, well, there's a lot to be talked about, but we only have a certain amount of time. So Bioshock Infinite is a completely complex game. We both really enjoyed it. Got a 5-star review on 8bitfoundation.com. You can see that on the website. We've also got tips going on for that.